All right, so it begins. I shared the slider with you guys as well. So I'm gonna just ask you a quick question this morning about, oh, this is not a this is multiple choice, we don't want that. Text. What project did you make yesterday? I'm sorry if it was a little open-ended yesterday. Typically this isn't usual the usual workflow of module 3, but as I mentioned beforehand, we're doing things a little bit different this time around, which honestly I think might be a little bit better. A basic Pokemon project. TweetPie extended. Okay, good, good. We're going to be doing extended TweetPie stuff today, so that should be pretty fun. What else we got? Translating input sentence into Mandalorian language. I helped you with that one yesterday. A picture of cocktails and then their proper glasses. Nice, nice Pokemon. They working with financial news API today. So you're moving on to another API. Translating input into, I just read that one. Made an app that would tell you about random Pokemon, then add their info to a DB. Perfect. Now I know this all seems like semi-basic stuff. I mean, look at Slido. It's kind of complicated in terms of web applications, but you should know that you're not a web developer. You don't need to be making super intense web applications. That is not the point of being a data scientist. This is more, this week is more getting you familiar with how to utilize data science and web applications. And hopefully yesterday you saw the importance of APIs. Now there's a lot of APIs out there, and I'm sure you encountered a lot yesterday when you were looking through the fun API list. But they're super powerful. You know, like um, the ones that you probably checked out yesterday weren't nearly as intense as some of the other ones that you're probably going to be examining in Unit 4 as well as this next build week. You're going to be building a Flask application this next build week. So you'll be using the stuff we learned here, building upon it, and likely be building a far more intense application using Flask package architecture and a collection of other different types of stuff. So yeah, that's in general um, what the point of yesterday was getting you familiar with APIs. But now we're going to do something a bit cooler and dive into the Twitter API account and how we can sort of get queries and how we can sort of implement it into a web page. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So again, I recommend you navigate to your developer.twitter account because we're going to start using it again today. So navigate there, and also navigate to the location you've been coding in this week. So I am in dev, clear, cp lambda, unit 3, solutions. Oh, no, wait, we lost point 3. Okay, and then DS24. Okay, so essentially what we're going to be building today is, let me show you guys. Let me set my D shell configuration because I hate changing directories and all this stuff so all the time. All right, sprint 3. Oh. Cool. And I'm going to test TweetPie. Okay, so essentially this is what we're going to be working on today. We're going to be building something that looks like this. All right. We're going to be taking let me go ahead and get this running. Oh, we need to activate our pip environment, of course. So we're going to go ahead and, we are going to be building this today. Sounds super exciting. I'm sure if you saw the module 3 DS23, it's a little bit more intense, but I think this is a good basic start. So it's going to take a username. All right, we're going to hit submit, and then what it should be doing is it should be, I think my API keys have changed, but it's going to show the user. Let's see what it says. What's the error I'm getting back? Unique constraints. Yeah, oh yeah, that's right. Okay, so the assignment today is going to be also figuring out some additional functionalities that need to be worked out in terms of the DB SQL database. But like I said, we'll be walking through all that today, and hopefully get to the point when we don't have any more errors. So that'll be fun. Like I said, I think it's an API key issue, but we're going to be working through that today. So with that, let's go ahead and actually start coding some of this stuff. So I'm going to be navigating to VS Code and not VS Code, I'm going to be navigating to my terminal, and I'm going to open up this DS24 TweetPy app directory. So DS24 TweetPy app, clear this up, open this up, and if you remember, this is where we left off yesterday. We had these API key secret, this authorization handling, all this sort of basic API connection stuff that we talked about, right? So we did all that yesterday. Now, with that, we're going to go have to activate our pip environment. So pip env shell. Okay, and you should have these dependencies in your pip environment. You should have Flask, SQL Alchemy request, and TweetPy. That's going to allow us to sort of, connect to the Twitter database, make requests, use SQL Alchemy, and just basically use the basic Flask micro framework. So essentially that's what's happening, right? So we're going to navigate back here. We're going to make a couple of things. So typically, when you're using a Flask application, you use the HTML you make is stored underneath a directory called templates, and that's all found in the Flask HTML documentation. It's all found on the documentation of Flask. You can see a brief little description right here. It's taking a second. Hold up. Yeah, so you got the base layout, and then Flask gives us these sort of nice little percent in brackets. And if you were in the Q&A yesterday, you saw me use a little bit of those. But this essentially is some functionality that Flask provides us, and I will explain that more today. But in general, here is the templates documentation that you're probably going to want to check out today. I'm also going to create a question thread real quick in case you guys have any questions. Boom, there we go. And let me add this guy. Cool. All right, so we're basically going to be getting into some of the basic HTML stuff today. So like I said, make sure you've created a templates folder right here, because this is going to hold most of our HTML code. I'm just going to go ahead and make a few templates that we're going to use. We're going to make a base.html template. We're going to make a user.html template, and we're going to make a reset.html template. Okay. So we have 3 HTML templates, and we're going to be using each one of these in our app today. Okay. Base.html is going to be at the home route. User.html is going to be at the user submission route, and the reset.html is going to be at the reset route. So those are all the endpoints that we're going to have today. And each endpoint you visit is going to have different HTML code associated with it. Okay. So with that, we're also going to go ahead and create a new file, and we're going to call this, again, example app.py. And this will hold the meat of our code. So with that, we also need to go ahead and import a few important things. So I'll just come up here and say the our single page. Oh my gosh, my O is still messed up. Our single page web application. Cool. Single page TweetPy web application. Cool. And we're going to import some fundamentals. We need Flask. From Flask, import Flask. You're going to probably want to import get end. Remember that handles are environment variables. So from OS, import get end. We're probably going to want to import SQL Alchemy as well. So from SQL Alchemy, import SQL Alchemy. Right, we need Flask.SQL Alchemy. Flash SQL Alchemy, import SQL Alchemy. Let's see, what's it called? Flash SQL Alchemy, import SQL Alchemy. And then I think that's everything we might need. Now we also need to do the configurations as well. So with that, we also probably going to want to create a couple of routes, but first we need to create or do our configurations, right? So do we remember how to do configurations? Is everybody on the same page with that? Remember we have to do, app, and we have to do the app dot configuration stuff, but first we need to make our app, right? Does anybody remember how to make our app? Say app equals Flask name, right? Essentially that's basically how we initiate our application, right? Now I am going to ask you guys one more question on the slider real quick, and that is, what is the point? What does HTML, CSS, and JavaScript do? Do you guys want to give me a brief description of what each of those do? I'm kind of curious to know where you're at because, like I said, we're going to be doing a little bit of some web development stuff today. So I'll just give you a moment to answer. HTML skeleton, CSS style, JS makes it fluid responsive. Exactly. So we're just going to be focusing on the HTML today. Not going to focus too much on the CSS. We are going to use a built-in CSS style sheet, which is going to give us some nice CSS functionality, but we're not going to be really using the JavaScript today, which is fine. You guys aren't web developers. You don't need to learn JavaScript. And Java and JavaScript are two different things. That's very important to note. That's often something that's confused by a lot of developers in general, whether it be data science or web developers. Java and JavaScript are two completely different things. CSS, HTML skeleton, CSS presentation. JavaScript is the behavior though, so good on that. HTML is markup language, CSS is a styling language, JavaScript, however, is a programming language. Exactly. This is really well put as well. JavaScript typically handles the logic and most of the other stuff. HTML is the markup language and CSS is the styling language. Locations, the page, this is the style and color. JS is what makes things work by clicking buttons. Yeah, this is all very, very well done. I agree with a lot of this. Again, if we use the this Flask.palettes project web application as an example, if we go ahead and hit inspect, we get up these dev tools, okay? And this is the source code right here, and we can see that. And then we have the console, sources, and network, all right? So this console right here is a JavaScript console. It allows us to run basic knowledge, and we have specific JavaScript functionalities that are available to us, right? Specific functions that are built into JavaScript. So this isn't Python we have in this console. This is a JavaScript console, and that's super important to know. And I'd say, if anything, if you typically elements, console, and network are your three most important stuff. Network just tracks network calls, but again, you're not web developers, so we don't really need to get super into this. Still important to know and understand though. Now, today I'd also like to talk about, and this is sort of important before we get into the building the Flask application that we're building today. It's talking about the differences between backend, front end, and databases. So let's discuss that this morning, and then we can continue building our application. So what is the difference between front end, back end, and databases? Now, I'm going to ask you guys another question. I've got a lot of questions this morning going. In general, what is the difference between front end, back end, and databases? What is the difference? What is the difference between front end, back end, and databases? There is a difference, at least on the web application side of things. It's kind of an important question because typically you guys are going to be dealing with the back end, right? And if you remember when I pulled up the web frameworks on Monday and showed you guys what web frameworks are, we had a bunch of, I gave a distinction between Flask and Django and Vue and React. So Flask and Django use a Python backend, but they have a JavaScript, HTML, and CSS front end. So Django uses a Python backend. Flask, which is not on here because it's not the most popular web framework, but it's a micro framework, so that makes sense. Django uses a Python backend, which means that the code that you write in the backend and the stuff that determines the backend interactions are written in Python. Vue, however, Vue and React, which is not on here, Vue and React. React is the web framework that the current web students are using at Lambda. Vue and React use a JavaScript background. That means that they code JavaScript. And if we go back to the meeting, we remember, or not the meeting, the second poll, we remember that somebody said, oh, JavaScript is a coding language. And essentially it is, because it allows us to write specific logic. And JavaScript has been built upon over the course of the last 10 years to basically allow for Vue and React to use it as use it for backend implementation. So that's important to know. If you want to expand into web frameworks, it might be easier to go into Django since it uses a Python backend. Vue and React are going to be a bit difficult because you need to know JavaScript in order to do that, which is also a valuable tool. JavaScript was the second language I learned, so I definitely consider it to be a valuable one. But yeah, let's go back to the poll and see what we got. So we got the term front end refers to the user interface, while back end means the server, application, and database that work behind the scenes to deliver information to the user. The user enters requests through the interface. Exactly. Yeah, this is very well put. Front end user interaction, back end engineering interaction, database, no interaction. I'm not necessarily, I think you mean in terms of the user, because the engineers, I would say, do interact with the database, but I think I get your point and I agree. Front end is what the users see, back end is the software that is working behind the scenes to make things work and connect. Yeah, exactly. I think you guys are all in the same point, same place. The front end is the GUI, the back end is the brain, and the database is the organizer and where the information is located. Yeah, all very valid points. Yeah, so I think you guys already have an understanding of front end versus back end. I'm going to pull up a quick image and I'll explain it in more depth. But let's see what we got here. There's typically this nice, yeah, this is a good one. So front end is the pretty stuff, right? When I go here and I see this nice little templates tag and all this CSS and HTML, this is all front end code, right? Go to base layout, I click on that, I'm on another front end page. These colors, everything that's here is all front end code and the user can interact with it, right? And the back end code is typically a little bit grosser. Nobody really cares about the way it looks to the user because the user doesn't have access to it. And that's a really big distinction between front end and back end code. Typically a user or client being me or anybody who's interacting with the web application, have access to the front end code. When I come up here and I click view page source, you can see I have access to all of the front end code. And this is pretty neat in terms of user interaction and development. Like I have access to all of the stuff that is being displayed right here. And if I go into my inspect thing, which I already am, I can go ahead and interact with that front end code. I can come up here, I can delete this, I can delete all this stuff, get rid of it entirely, and it's all gone. You can see I just edited the front end code. I didn't end the source code. I edited the front end code that was brought to me. If I go to this URL again, it's brought back. Because again, if we remember how URLs function, this code right here, or this URL, when I go to it, I interact with another server and they send me this front end source code, as well as the back end source code, but it's not available to me. That's an important difference between front end and back end. Front end is available to the client, the back end is not. And that distinction is important because if you imagine something like a bank, right, it would be kind of unfortunate if anybody on the front end code or anybody who's accessing the bank information or bank website could go into the inspect tool, interact with this stuff, and get information about the database, API keys, the database interactions, the user information, the account information of their database, all this other stuff that we put on the back end because the back end deals with database connections and sort of the logic of our application, as well as, ensuring secure connections, making the model, all this other stuff that typically you want to hide from the user is put in the back end. And it'd be kind of annoying if the front end user or not the front end user, the client had access to that, right? It'd be super annoying if they could just come in here and sort of see the way that we've set up interactions between the database and the backend. Backend, again, holds important information that we do not want the front end user to be able to modify like we can here, right? We don't want them to be able to do that. So another example is if we sort of go to a shop or something, right? We go to Amazon or something along those lines. Typically, their prices and their price architecture is stored in the back end. So it'd be kind of annoying and probably quite devastating to the Amazon marketplace if you could go in and edit the backend code that sort of sets prices for items and change it to half a cent, and then you add it to your cart. You can go in, change the cart fundamentals, change the prices of the items, change the database even, and then now you're getting items for free and Amazon ships them to you, right? So that's an example of why we'd want to keep back end and front end different. All right, so I hope that makes sense. Again, backend code can be Python or it can be JavaScript or it can be something else as well, as long as it's some type of logical language. You can code most of your stuff in the backend. Now, the distinction that should be made between front end, back end, and databases, we've already sort of talked about the distinction between front end and back end. How about we talk about the distinction between databases, front end, and back end? So let's imagine we have a user, right? And we've created some type of application. They need to interact with the application, and that's where the front end comes in. The front end sort of acts as the GUI or graphical user interface for the user, so they can interact with either the database or the backend code, right? So if I add a user, if I go up here and I Google something, right, I'm making a request somewhere. It's handled by the backend, and then a request is made to the database that is storing all of Google's information, right? All these images are stored on some database out there. And this GUI, this Google interface, is allowing me to interact with the backend code that sort of queries and runs the model to get me the best search results I possibly can. And that's all querying a database as well, right? So I make this request that is sent to some server. The server interprets that request, runs their search engine optimization model on that request, and gives me back all these images from some database, right? So the back end and database are closely tied for sure. Anything you see on the front end that is being accessed from some database has to go through the back end to access that very database. We can see that too if we go to our Twitter application, right? If we come up here and we go API key secret, we pass in our authentication and we set a username that we want to get. We get the username from the Twitter database. What's happening here is we're making a request to the user database, right? And if we wanted to display this information in our HTML code, well, it's going through some backend. We haven't set that backend up yet, but it's going through the backend, accessing some database. It could be the Twitter database, or it could be one of the SQLite databases we've been messing around with the past couple of days. But at the end of the day, the difference between the three are front end, graphical user interface, the thing the client interacts with, the thing the user has access to, back end, the stuff that handles the logic, the connection to the database, and general model building, which is where you guys come in as data scientists. You will probably, when working with web developers, be implementing a model on the back end to sort of interpret some type of user input. And then the database as well is something you guys might be messing around with. You know SQL Alchemy and you did database stuff last week, so you should have at least some understanding of how we can set up databases. And that's very important in web development because databases store a lot of the information that you see all the time. It stores user information, passwords, all the important stuff. So when we set up this database here, we are doing some form of data science, right? And again, the database is just storing information from the websites. Backend deals with that connection. Front end deals with the prettiness of the whole thing. So we got a question as well. Is all the script handwritten by a web developer or is auto-generated as they write their code? That's a pretty good question. So this right here, again, I don't know at the end of the day. I'd say that this is probably auto-generated, or they're using some type of framework or some type of style sheet to generate this code. That's also super important to note, is that most people don't go in and hand write HTML anymore. I mean, like, nobody does that. There's so many different sort of things you can, like if I go to Bootstrap, all right, Bootstrap 4, this is sort of a sort of front end framework or a design library that allows me to go in to it lets me go into this design library and pick specific templates. If we go to the docs for examples, you can see that they have these sidebars, features, heroes, headers, all this stuff that's pre-written. That's what people use a lot of times is they use code that's been written by other people, throw it into their HTML, and then it's done. So I don't necessarily know if this is auto-generated. It can be written by web developers, or it can be auto-generated or auto-imported from either Bootstrap or some third-party software that takes some code and turns it into something else. So yeah, so that is what's happening there. Is there any other questions about what I've talked about in terms of front end and back end code? Anything at all? If there's not, we're going to go ahead and make some of the front end part of our application and then probably take a 5-minute break. But during that 5-minute break, I encourage you to either stretch or maybe take a look at this template stuff so it becomes a little bit clearer. No questions though? Cool. So let's navigate back to VS Code and let's continue where we left off. There's a little bit of a tangent, but that's okay. So we're importing from OS this get end function. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new file and just create our environment variables right now. I'm not going to add anything to it, but I'm just going to keep it there for safekeeping. And as you can see, I have this architecture right now, templates next to .n, next to example app, next to my pip files and readmes. So super important stuff. We also have all this stuff next to each other, right? So in other situations, when we're building more complex Flask architectures, and I'll probably show you guys this tomorrow, we have a dedicated file that sort of stores all of this app information, templates, and all that stuff, and then that's next to the pip file.log. I'll be showing you guys different architecture tomorrow, and we try and push to Roku, and we sort of come up with a more complicated application. Not super complicated, but more complicated than what we've been doing. So keep that in mind. Okay, so we've done that. Let's go ahead and do a couple of things. So I'm going to say app.config. And we're going to configure our SQL Alchemy database. So I'm going to just say SQL Alchemy. Spell this right, SQL Alchemy database URI. Right, so we got SQL Alchemy database URI. Then we're going to set that equal to get env, and we're going to probably want to put our environment variable inside of this .env file so that we can access the correct environment variable that we want to have. So I'm going to just go up here and say database URI and set that equal to SQLite, and then call it db.sqlite3. Okay, so we have that environment variable. I'm going to go ahead and grab that by saying database URI get end database URI. Let me grab that. So now we have that environment variable being outed as well as being referenced by this SQL Alchemy database URI. We also need to turn off track modifications so we can avoid that deprecation error we got yesterday. So I'm going to say app.config SQL Alchemy database, or no, track modifications, sorry. And again, all this track modifications is going to do is it's just going to avoid us continuously tracking each SQL Alchemy query that we make. So it's just like, if you want to do some research on it, you can. It's deprecated, so I'm not going to really explain it too much because it's probably going to be gone soon. And then I'm going to just say db equals SQL Alchemy and pass in our application we just made. Okay, is that looking good, guys? So again, just following the same stuff that we've done in the past, and then I'm going to create a couple routes. I'll say add app.route. I'll make a home route, and I'll pass in a function, and we'll call it root. Okay. And then I am going to return a template. I'm going to say return render template. Now this render template function is a function that is provided to us by Flask, and it basically allows us to render HTML templates. Okay, and the reason that this templates folder is so important is because when we say render template, Flask is immediately going to look for this templates folder, and then we can specify a specific HTML file we want by saying base.html and passing in the HTML file respectively. Okay, So we're going to pass in that base.html. That's going to be one route. I'm going to make another route. We're going to go ahead and call this user submitted, and this is going to become a little bit more clear when we actually make the user submission route. Let's say user submitted, and I'll point to that later on. For now, just kind of ignore this. Endpoint is equal to user submitted. I'll make this a little bit clearer by adding in these notes. I hate when this does this. Then we'll say up here, we're going to say endpoint is equal to perfect. All right, so we've done that. I'm going to say user submitted function, and we're going to return a user HTML template. All right. Then on top of that, we're also going to create another route. Call this reset. This reset route, I'm sure you've guessed it, is going to point to the reset HTML file that we've made up here. So I'm going to say def reset, and then do return render template, pass in user.html. All right, or reset.html. My bad. So we're just returning reset.html. I'm going to leave it like that for now. I'm going to specify another note up here. We're going to say endpoint equals reset. Okay. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start coding out some of the front end code we have up here with these HTML files. I'm going to share this with you guys right now, though, in the Slack channel. Send that. Cool. So we have 3 routes right now, each loading a different HTML code. All right. So now I'm going to start editing the base.html file. Before I continue, though, are there any questions about what's going on? So let's go back to Slido. Nothing. Okay, cool. That's good. That's good to hear. So we're going to go ahead and create an HTML file. So I'm going to create HTML. I'm going to have to go up here and say doc type HTML. This is just specifying that this is an HTML file. It's something you have to do with HTML, at least in this basic form. And then we have 2 HTML tags. And what we're going to put in here is our HTML code. All right. Again, if there's any questions about any of this, feel free to ask, but you guys don't really need to be knowing HTML code. I'd say this basic functionality is enough that we're going to be learning today. So HTML indicates the beginning of our HTML. We're going to go ahead and create a header tag, which is just basically going to be specifying specific stuff within our HTML document. This is not referring to a header. This is referring to the head of the HTML document. So just the top stuff where we put stuff like the title that we have, which when we say title is going to be referring to the web tab name up here. So when I say title and I set this equal to, Twitter, or I type in Twitter API key, API practice, this is going to be the name of the URL that we have up here. So this is going to be the name up here. This is template/flash documentation. That would be this title. That's what they have there. Okay. So we can also go ahead and put in the style sheet. And this style sheet is basically going to allow us to implement different types of CSS and HTML code. So you see we have these tags here, right? These tags basically are HTML code. It basically points to specific things. All right. Now, what these link style sheets do, and this is sort of in reference to Bootstrap, what this allows us to do is use pre-built HTML tags. So if I go to the documentation here, I'm not going to be using Bootstrap. You can if you'd like, but if we go to content or components, accordion, you can see that I have built-in sort of classes, accordions, and all this kind of stuff. Again, this isn't meant to be an HTML lesson, but I think just giving you a general run through is sort of important. So we need to specify an href. I'm going to be using the style sheet of unpkg.com/picnic. So this is just a really basic style sheet. I can visit this URL and show you guys exactly what we have in store for us. No, sorry, I had to sneeze. It's allergy season, so it's sneezing a lot. Oh no, that's not good. What just happened? Okay, I'm gonna give it a second to connect. It's taking a minute. Interesting. I wonder what happened. I'm gonna just do unpick KG picnic and see if we get brought to the right place. Here we go. That's right, because I was referencing that style sheet. So this is going to give us the style sheet, and I'll sort of show you what that means later on. But then we're going to make some body tag, and this is going to hold the meat of our HTML code. So this is where we're going to put the stuff that we want to print out. And I'm just going to go ahead and say article, which is pointing to the style sheet here. Again, not super important. I'm going to share this code with you guys. You don't need to know front-end code unless you're trying to do some type of project, some type of portfolio project. So it is semi-important, but really a lot of this stuff is just supplemental. So this is the picnic library that we have. We have in a collection of different stuff. Where's the README at? README. This article, this is a reserved HTML tag that is brought to us by the unpackaged picnic style sheet. So this flex 2, this is all provided by unpackaged picnic. So this is all stuff that they were given to us. If you didn't put this in here, you wouldn't be able to use this. So that's important to note. I'm going to go ahead and give it a style, which is basically just HTML, CSS. Say style equals padding 3M, 1M. Fantastic. And then we're going to leave it like that. This is just going to provide a nice little sort of buffer for our code. So then we go ahead and do some percent signs, say block content. This will become apparent what we're doing when we actually start using HTML inheritance, which is what we're going to use for the reset and user.html. I promise you, we're not going to be writing a lot of HTML today. It's just this first part so we can have a little bit of the front end code. Again, I don't want you guys to remember this. This is not super important. If you care to, it's not a bad thing. But again, this is just so that you guys have some front end code, and so it doesn't look really bad. So we're going to put the block content. I'm going to create a div, and we're going to go ahead and say h1, and this just stands for header, and this is going to make our text big. Again, this is really nothing super crazy because we're just doing HTML. We haven't even done any CSS that much except for up here. We're just going to say Twitter API practice, all right? And this is now, this is not header, H1 and head are completely different. This is going to be now a title on our actual application. And I'm going to run this app afterwards, and you can sort of see an actual image of what this stuff looks like when we actually run the web application. But for now, you're just going to follow along. So I'm going to say form action. And what this action is going to do is it's basically going to send us to this action. It's going to send us to a specific URL endpoint. I'm going to say the user submitted. So this is going to be a form. And if we go up here to the example app.py, you can see I have a user submitted route. So whenever I click on this form button, we haven't added the button yet, but we're going to make a form right now. Whenever I submit this form, it's going to redirect us to user submitted. I'm going to enter a placeholder as well. Actually, we don't need a placeholder. We need a method. I'm going to enter a method. And that method is going to be equal to post because we're posting information. We're posting information to the backend, and that's what post means. If we go to our HTTP methods, I'll give an explanation of what those are right now. HTTP methods, if you remember what I said yesterday, are CRUD operations. So they basically create, read, update, and delete, but this is more in terms of web stuff. So GET allows us to retrieve information from the web. Post allows us to submit data to the server, which is what we're doing here. We're submitting a form to our backend code. So this will sort of send it to the backend. And again, a lot of this web dev stuff is very sort of 2020 in the sense that you kind of need to finish the application to see what's going on. You need to have like very good hindsight at seeing what this is going to do so you can implement some stuff early on to make sure that it works. So I promise you, as we move forward today, it'll start to be a little bit more clear with what all of this is doing. I can assure you. Put also saves an object at the location. So put is used for update, post is used for create, get is used for read, delete is obviously used for delete. But this allows us to sort of submit forms, create stuff. When I come up here and I type some stuff into Google and I hit enter, I'm submitting data to the Google server. They're taking that data and then they're running their little search engine optimization on it. When I hit enter, and I get back this information. Oh, this is weird. When I get back this information, when I get back HTTP methods and I submit that, I'm retrieving information as well. So there's a post and get in there. So I'm posting some information. They're handling this HTTP methods text I put in, running a search engine optimization, and then I get back and retrieve the information. And HTTP stands for hyper text transfer protocol, which basically means that it's transferring information in this situation. It's transferring this information to me when I make this request. So that's really weird. So, you know, when we go to the beginning of a website and we have HTTPS, that's the same thing here. I'm sending this information and I'm getting back this this text. It's a text transfer protocol, right? So it's transferring text over the web. Again, we don't need to get super into that. It's kind of important you have a base understanding of it. But all we're doing is making a form to post. Again, we'll get a better understanding when we actually sort of create it. I'm going to create an import tag and we're going to say type as text. This will allow us to import things into our form. I'm going to have a name and I'm going to set this equal to username text. And this will allow us to reference it in the back end. Again, this will become a lot more clear once I actually start coding the back end. Then we're going to say placeholder, and this will basically just be the text that we have within that placeholder. So I'm going to say enter a username. And ideally what we want to do is we want to be able to enter a username, query that user from Twitter, add them to our database, and then print out their associated tweets. So nothing super complex yet. All right. And then we're going to have another input, and this input is just going to be a submit button. And this will allow us to submit. Let's say input submit value equals submit. So this is the placeholder again for, or not value, placeholder equals submit. This will be the value for the submit button. All right. Actually, we probably want to do value. Value is just going to be pointing to this unpackaged picnic and saying what the value is. Okay. So we've done that. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you guys what this looks like. I'm going to go to terminal, ls. I'm going to do Flask app. I actually probably should specify the Flask app up here. So I'm going to just say Flask app equals example app.py. Okay, go to terminal. I do pip-m shell to make sure I'm in the right environment. And then I do Flask run, and it should run for me. Interesting. I wonder why that's not working. All right, well, we'll just point to it here on out. Doesn't matter. All right, we'll copy this, go to our web page, paste it here. You can see I now have, and this is all coming from this. If we pull up both of these next to each other, you can see that I have my Twitter API practice. That's this thing. Then I have, or well, Twitter API practice is this thing up here. You can see I have the header. If we get a better look, Twitter API practice. If I were to change this to just Twitter API, that would be the name up here. I have the Twitter API practice, which is the title. It's a header. I have the padding, which is giving us 3 M of space between the top and the bottom, 1 M here. And then I also have my form, which is a text form, and I can enter in a username. If I enter in NWLFU or Elon Musk, whatever it may be, if I enter that in, I can hit submit, which is this input right here. It'll submit the form, and once it's submitted, it'll run this action and put me at this route up here. So watch up here, this URL when I hit submit, you can see it brings me to user submitted. Now, we don't have a user submitted route, or at least I thought we did. User submitted. I guess I'm not rendering anything. Yeah, I don't think I'm rendering anything. Maybe if I just put return some text or something. I don't know why this isn't working. It's kind of weird. Let's see what it says. User submitted. I don't know. We'll deal with that when we get to the user submitted endpoint. That's okay. Yeah, so let's go ahead and finish up this base.html, and then we can take a break. You guys can look over this, make sure you have the right stuff, and then we can go ahead and actually start coding some Python stuff. So I've done the form. Now I'm going to go ahead and add one more thing. Again, this end block is going to be important later on. We don't really need to talk about it right now, but we will, I promise. I'm going to say div, let me say ID equals user tweets. This will also become important later for styling. And then I'm going to say percent for tweet in tweets. This is again Flask stuff. If you remember the documentation, we can do this cool little, you can do this, you can enter in some cool logic here. Just says it right here. We can enter in and pass down information using this render template syntax. So again, this will become apparent. Let me just finish writing this. I know that can be kind of annoying, but I promise you, it takes me writing it to actually understand what's going on. So I'm going to say end block, or not end block, end for loop. This ends the for loop. Again, this can all be found on the Flask documentation. This right here is Flask's fundamentals that allow us to sort of run, or Flask functionalities that allow us to run logic inside of our HTML documents. So I'm going to say span. I'm going to say class equals stack. Again, this is from the picnic style sheet that we're using. And then I'm going to go ahead and say tweet. And this will print out each tweet, and I can hand that down information. I can hand this information down because this variable isn't declared in HTML. Instead, it's clarified here. We need to now be able to pass down. Be able to pass down the specific tweets. All right. In fact, I'm actually not going to do tweets here. Let's do users so we can see each user. So for user, in users, and then we'll print out the user. Okay. So I'm going to get rid of this ID up here, and I'm going to say users, and we haven't passed in any users yet, so I'm just going to pass in a blank list. And this base.html will go through each of those users we have in our database. We haven't created a database yet, nor have we created the actual logic to get users into that. So we'll leave it at that for now. I'm going to print out each user. And I think that's everything we want to do. Cool. Yeah, so I'm going to share this with you guys. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break. And then once we're back, we can go ahead and get more into the actual coding stuff. So this was probably the most HTML we're going to write all day. So if you have any questions about what some of this stuff does, please feel free to reach out. I'm going to go ahead and paste this. And there's no questions. Are there any questions before we leave about what's been going on? Any at all? Again, I promise you this will become a little bit more clear when we actually start doing some of the backend code and when we get this running again. So let me go back to this and get rid of that. So right now we can take information and we can submit it, and method not allowed. Again, this isn't entirely finished yet. If we go back to our terminal, we can see the errors. Post user submitted doesn't exist. We're getting a 4 or 5. So let's just give it a second. For you guys, give you a second to ask any questions. Seems like everything's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start that 5-minute break. I encourage you to look through the HTML, and I will see you once we're back. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and, like I said, start coding in the example app.py. We'll come back to this base.html eventually, I promise. So right now, we're going to go ahead and create our database with SQL Alchemy. So I'm going to full screen this. I'm going to go down, and I'm going to implement our SQL Alchemy database. All right, actually, how about we actually see what we're going to query before? I think that might make this a little bit clearer. So I'm going to instead actually go up here and go to new file and create a twitter.py. And what this is going to do is this is going to query our data, or not our database, but query the Twitter database. So we're going to put in all the authentication and all of the getting users and all that stuff inside of here. So remember all the stuff we had yesterday, all the sort of Twitter queries, we're basically just going to add that to our twitter.py. So I'm going to go ahead and import a few things. I'm going to say from OS import get end, because if you remember, we want to be storing our API keys and all that kind of stuff in here. So I'm going to create a couple of variables, API key secret, and this is where we're going to put our variables. So I'm going to go over to the developer account. I'm going to grab my API key. I'll give you guys a second to do this, and grab my API key secret and paste it here, and then save that. Give you guys a second to catch up. Make sure you have these names, and then we can move forward and start actually querying from the database again. We did this yesterday, but it was only in the Python REPL. Now we're going to actually be creating a function that utilizes it. Give you guys a second. I don't know if I want to make sure you're on the same page, because the next steps are going to be big. Okay, cool. How's it? All right, so let's go ahead and go to, we don't need this anymore, go to twitter.py, and we've imported OS. Let's import tweetpy, since that's what we're going to be using to connect to tweetpy or connect to Twitter. We're going to add that. We're going to do our authentication. We're going to say auth equals tweetpy.oauth. You guys remember that's what we did yesterday with this whole thing. Pass in our credentials into the OAuth handler. It handles authentication. So say auth handler. We're going to say get end, and we're going to pass in, if you remember, pull this up side by side. We're going to pass in our API key and our API key secret. So let's double check to see that it's the right name in the .env file. API key secret. So I say get env, API key, get to env, API key secret. All right, so we're grabbing those API keys and get rid of this. And then we need to authenticate ourselves, pass in that authentication to the .api method, and these need to be strings. Oops, because we're referencing, we're not referencing a variable, we're referencing another file's variable. So now we're going to go ahead and pass that into Twitter. So we're going to say Twitter, and I'm going to capitalize it. Twitter equals, actually, I'm not going to capitalize it. I don't know why I capitalize it. Twitter equals tweetpy.api, and we're going to pass in that authentication we got back. Pass in that authentication, and then now we can go ahead and start accessing that Twitter API. So I'm going to create a function, and I'm going to call it get info, and this is going to get info about a specific user with the username. All right, so all we're going to be doing is passing in a username to this function. I'm going to go ahead and say Twitter underscore user. I'm going to grab a Twitter user, and if we remember, again, pull this up like 4 times, just leave it open. We remember how to query a user. We do twitter.getUser, and that's how we get a user from the Twitter database. So I'm going to say Twitter. This is referencing this object we've created from this class. Say Twitter.getUser, and we're going to pass in that username that we pass in up here, right? So we now have a Twitter user, and with that, we can go ahead and access the tweets as well. So I'm going to say tweets equals Twitter underscore user.timeline. We're going to grab, in total, we're going to want to grab let's grab 500 tweets. We want to exclude replies, set that equal to true. We want to include retweets. Let's set that equal to false. All right, and then we're going to want to do tweet mode equals extended. And this will give us access to all the Unicode values. And then that's looking pretty good, right? How about we go ahead, instead of just getting the tweets though, how about we just get the text associated with the tweet? We don't really care about the other information associated with tweets. Remember, we got back an object with this, and I'm just going to do the tweet text for now. So I'm going to say tweets text. Create a list. I'm going to say for tweet in tweets, and we're going to append that list by saying tweets text dot append, and we'll append tweet. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and return the Twitter user and the tweets. Cool, that's looking pretty good. But what if we're getting an error? What if we have an error when we actually try and query, and let's say we enter in a fake username. Let's say we enter in like something like ridiculously long that doesn't make any sense into this username parameter. Well, we want to be sure that we know how to handle that error. Right now, we're just going to get back an empty list and the mistake is not going to be raised for the rest of the application. So how about we do a try statement? And this try statement will if there is an error that occurs, we can handle that exception. So I'm going to say try this. If an error does occur, then we want to handle it in the following way. So we're going to say exception. We're going to cast that as E, and then we're going to print something out and say print error processing. Let's do the %s format. Username, because there was an error processing that user with the following exception E. So that's looking good. This needs to be tweet text, not tweet. And I think we're looking pretty good for that. Cool. All right, so we've pretty much handled getting our user. I think, are we all feeling pretty comfortable with that? Yeah, any questions? Is there no attendance code for today? Taylor will actually be sending the attendance code. I can reach out to her during our next break in a few, like 20 minutes, and have her send it. But yes, there will be an attendance code today. Just wait for it. No questions on the question thread. We're feeling pretty good with what's going on so far. Does this make sense? I'm going to share this file with you guys. Cool. Good. Fantastic. So now that we have our twitter.py, I'm going to go ahead and import this function. I'm going to say from Twitter, import get info. It's the name of this application, right? Get info. So we've done that. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm getting a little pylint error. What's this say? Unused. Oh, it's just unused. Okay, cool. So now I've done that. Now it's time to actually code the now it's time to code the rest of the application. So I'm going to go down to this, go down here to create my database, right? We haven't created our database yet. So I'm going to say creating a user database. And how about we store each user's tweets? Because if you remember, we're getting back tweets and the Twitter user. How about we store the username and the tweets in this database that we're about to make? I'm going to say class user db.model, and then because remember we have to inherit from db.model in order to have access to specific stuff. So then I'm going to say stores Twitter users and tweets and corresponding tweets. Fantastic. So then I'm going to say ID equals db.column. We're going to want an ID for this this table. I'm going to say big integer because if you remember yesterday, we go to tweet examples, we had the tweet dot or user.id, yeah, Twitter user.id. So we're going to use that same ID that's found on the Twitter database to store in our database. So we're just going to want it to be a big integer because I think it's pretty large. It's like 10 digits, which I guess isn't huge, but just in case it does get huge, we want to be sure we account for that. This is a primary key. So I'm going to set this equal to true. Okay. And then I'm going to create a username value and a full name value. So we're going to store the username and the full name. We'll make both of these strings. So let me just say db.column. I'll say db.string. And we'll say 50 characters. And we're going to say nullable equals false. And I'm going to say the same thing for this full name. Cool. And with that, we're also going to store a tweets object. And we're going to store this tweet object as a pickle type object. So this is where I'm going to start talking about pickling. So I'm going to say db.column and db.pickle type. So I'm going to explain what this means. So what does pickling mean? Let me make a string representation of this first. So I'm going to say def rpr self, and then we're going to say return user dot format self dot username or full name. We'll do dot full name, and this is referencing these variables up here. Remember, because if you remember, db.model's handling this, and it's basically creating attributes for us here. So I could reference this user as user dot blah blah blah, user ID, user dot username, user dot full name, user dot tweets, and we'll see that today when I get more in depth in actually coding out some more of the back end. But before we do that, how about we go ahead and talk about what it means to store a pickle type object. Remember, we are storing this, or we're creating a list of tweets, and if you remember, at least I hope John talked about it. If you remember week one, I would have talked about, or John should have talked about, how these tweets, or how everything in Python is basically an object, right? Lists are objects, dictionaries are objects, integers are objects, strings are objects, pandas, data frames are objects, or well, classes. It's classes and objects. So there's a string class, there's a dictionary class, there's a integer class, there's a float class, there's a Boolean class, there's all these classes. And with these classes, when you create one of those objects from those classes, you still are interacting with objects, right? If you create a string object from a string class, you have a list of associated methods and attributes. You can do string dot replace because it is a class with associated methods. It's a fundamental class that exists within Python, but it's still a class nonetheless. So what pickling does is allow us to store any Python object as a serial string and then load that object up later. And I'll run through an example of that today, but that's essentially what's happening. So we have a list object that we're returning from Twitter.py, and we're going to store that object as a pickle type object, because pickling allows us to store objects, and specifically pickle type allows us to store objects in a SQL Alchemy model. So let's talk about pickling. So I'm going to navigate to my directory or my terminal, clear this up. Go, oops. Go to where we're currently at. And I'm going to activate the pickle environment. I'm going to say, clear this up. I'm going to say Python, enter my repo, and import pickle. Okay, pickle is also a part of the standard library, and I have a list of different things with pickle. I have pickle.dump, pickle.dumps. These are the ones I'm going to be talking about today. pickle.load and pickle.load and pickle.load_s. So pickle.load and dump are associated. Pickle.load_s and pickle.dump_s. Notice how it's not dumps, it's dump_s, and notice how it's not loads, it's load_s, because this s stands for string. So the difference between dump and dumps is dump allows us to dump to a file, while dump_s dumps a string. Load loads a file, a pickle file. Load_s loads a pickle string. We go to the documentation as well. You can see it's object serialization. This gives a nice description as well, but pretty much it just serializes. It serializes a package or not a package, a object for us so that we can load it later. You can sort of think about it as just saving, it just saves the object so we can load it up later with the same information. Now the cool thing is you can do this with models, you can do this with list, you can do this with strings, you can do this with any Python object. You can do this with Panda data frames. You can do this with any pandas data frames you'd like, right? So I can show you guys how to do that. Today, I'll give a little example right now. So there's load_s, dump_s, dump, and load. So I'm gonna go to iTerminal. I'm gonna go ahead and import pandas as PD. I don't have pandas because it's not a part of the standard library. I'm gonna go ahead and install that. I'm gonna say pip env install pandas. Oh. Pip env install pandas. I'm just gonna install pandas. You should as well. We're just installing it into DS24 TreePy app. Just gonna give it a second to download. It's kind of big. It should take a moment. Still taking a moment. It's okay though. There we go. Installing dependencies. Looks like it's good. Okay, cool. I'm gonna clear this up. I'm gonna go back into Python, the Python REPL. I'm gonna import pickle. I'm gonna import pandas as PD. It's taking a long time for some reason. We'll say pd.dataframe. Create a data frame. Let's just put some uninteresting information in here. I'm gonna say, well, let me create a dictionary first. So my dict, and I'm just gonna pass in some super simple information. I'm gonna say A, give it a list of, or I'll just do like 1, B, 2, C, 3. Okay, created a dictionary, and then I'm gonna do pd.dataframe. Pass in this information and create a pandas data frame. Oh, I need to pass an index. Okay, let me pass an index in. I guess you could just do this instead. Let's just make this a list. This is pretty ugly. All right, let me say pd.dataframe, my dict, and we now have our data frame. So I'm going to store this as df. So I'm going to say df equals pd.dataframe. Now data frame, notice that, and then I'm going to dump this data frame. Okay, so I'm going to say pd dot or pickle dot dump s. This will dump this string into a string. So if we do that, you can see I get back this long byte string. That's what's indicated by this B up here. It's a byte string, and it's serialized right now. So if I save this string, if I do s equals pickle dot dump s, I pass in data frame, I enter. You can see I still have that string. Now this isn't a data frame, is it? This is a serialized version of a data frame. Looks kind of weird, doesn't it? Well, if I load it up and I do pickle dot load s, I can load this string and it will give me back a data frame object. Look, you see it gave me back the data frame object. Isn't that cool? And it still has, if I set this equal to loaded df, it still has the information and the methods associated with it because it's serialized and loaded our object. So I can do loaded df, and remember the one that we had beforehand was just df. So I'll show you that you can do both. You can do that shape. We can do df dot shape. You can see that we have all the methods. We can do loaded df dot is null. Is null. You can see we get back false, false, false. So it saved our object. And to me, that's pretty cool, right? That's pretty neat that we can do that. It's pretty neat that we can load and unload an object and store it in a string value and access it later. This just stores it as a string though. What if we wanted to save it as a file and then load it later? Well, that's also possible. And that's possible with the load and dump values, not load s, not dump s, but load and loading dump. Geez. So let me go ahead and show you how we can do that. So I'm going to go ahead and open a file. We're going to say file equals open. We'll pass in a new file name. I'm going to write it. So I'm going to say write. We'll write this file, and we'll call this file name my model. We'll just call it my model. So we now have this file, my model. Cool. We can load it. So we're going to say dump pickle.dump. We want to dump that file. I think it takes file first, and then it takes the pickled object. So we're going to just pickle the df. So I'm going to say pickle, or I'm going to say not pickle. I'm going to say file, and then I'm going to say, and I'm going to pass in data frame because that's the one we want to offload. So if I enter, maybe it needs to be the other way. Df and then file. Ah, there we go. So we've dumped it. Now, if I exit out of this, you can see I now have a my model file. If I go ahead and check that out, if I do cat my model, you can see that it's the same serialized string, well, different one, but it's a byte string that we had when we did load s. It's just in, or dump s. It's just in file form now. If I clear this up, cool thing too now is I can load this model. Simply because it says my model, right? I can go into Python. I can import pickle. I don't need to import, I don't think I need to import pandas, but I'll import it anyways. So I might want to do some functionality. So then we do import pickle, import pandas, and I can do load or pickle.load. Well, I need to open the file first. So I'll say open, say file equals open. We'll open up my model. We'll open up my model, and we just want to read. Okay, so I hit enter. I now have my file. I can do pickle.load, pass in the file that I want to open up. So I'm going to pass in that file, and we get back our data frame. Remember, that's the exact same data frame we had up here. And I have the same model stuff. I can set it equal to df. Pickle load file, enter. Oh, I ran out of files. I need to reload the file. Stick with me. File. Df equals pickle dot load file. So now I have my file. I can do is null. I have the associated methods. I can do df dot shape. I can do df dot columns. I can do df dot I locate 0. I can do all this stuff, right? So it's all there. Really neat. I can df.drop it. I have all of the methods associated with pandas data frames. If you ask me, that's pretty sweet. And that's what happens in this VS Code thing right here. When I do, when I say pickle type, it's basically taking this object, and I could do it to an object as well. I could drop it. I could say s equals pickle dot dump s, and I'll just dump the string for now. I don't want to go through the process of making another file, but I could pass in a list. Let's say I have a collection of different tweets. I have, tweet 1, tweet 2, and maybe tweet 3. Okay, so I can go ahead and dump that string, and I've loaded it as s. I now have the byte string, and I can load it up again by saying pickle dot load s, and then passing in that string. And as you can see, I get back that object. So that's what's happening here. Is it's just basically a way we can save objects. You can use this for large models as well if you wanted to sort of offload an sklearn object, like some linear regression model you've made. You can save it as a file, because remember, we have that my model file here now. You can save it as a model, load it up again, and run it in the background. And that's how you sort of offload both models and objects in Python. There's other ways to do it. Pickle's obviously not the only serialization method, but there's other ones. And it's one of the popular ones, so it's important to know. Now I can, I'm gonna go ahead and delete this my model thing real quick. It's gone. I'm not gonna do it anymore, but that was just an example. We don't need it for the lesson today. But yeah, that's what this pickle type's doing. So when we pass in this tweets list, it's serializing it, storing it like that, and then we can load it again when we need to. So super important. We go back to the example app.py, and now that we've done this, we can sort of start coding the rest of our application. So this reset route is going to be pretty easy. I'm just going to say db.dropAll, db.createAll. This will create and reset our database. You should have encountered this multiple times, or we have encountered it multiple times, but it's literally reset.html database. So we're going to take a quick 5-minute break, and when we get back, we're going to add some very simple reset.html code, or not reset.html code. We're going to add some basic HTML code and show you how we can just inherit from base.html, and this inheritance points towards this block content, and I'll explain that. But for now, let's take a 5-minute break. I'll share the code I have with you guys right now, in specifically the example app.py, because I think that's the only one I changed. And then we can get back and start coding some more stuff. So say example app.py. Cool. All right, I'll see you when we're back. Is there any questions, by the way? Doesn't seem to be. I think that's a good thing. So I will wait for you on the other end of this 5-minute break. If you have questions, please ask. All right, sweet. See you soon.
Hey Dylan, how's it going?
I'm sensational. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. How's like today's Wednesday? How do you guys feel on Wednesday of like sprint three? Because sprint three is kind of insane. So like, how do you guys feel so far? I'm just curious. I haven't spoken to you in a while.
Um, the HTML was kind of crazy. Um, but other than that, I feel okay right now. I
Awesome.
think I think I'm following.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, cheers.
What's going on, guys? All right, we're back. So, what did I leave off on? We are starting to do this stuff, right? Yeah. So I'm gonna finish coding up the stuff, and for the reset.html, we're gonna learn a little bit about inheritance. Hopefully, this will also be coming together in the last 30 minutes. So, navigate to the reset.html. I'm gonna write a command right here. Again, this is Flask. This percent thing that's going on here with the bracket stuff, that's all handled by Flask. So I'm gonna say extends base.html. And what this is gonna do is this is basically going to take all of this code up to the block content code. So take all this stuff, and anything that's not inside this block content is going to be now put into this reset.html file. So this stuff is not going to be transferred over. It's basically like taking this whole extension thing and putting it here and getting rid of this. So basically like this is happening, and then we can insert stuff where this block content is at. This is the cool thing about inheritance by just doing percent or percent and then saying block content use space here. So same thing we put here, space HTML, and an end block. And then anything we put in between these is now going to get added to this in between these block content and block content tags. So I can do this. We can say end block, and then anything I put here is now going to get added to the base.html, at least when we visit this reset.html code. So I'm going to create an h2 tag. I'm going to say the user DB reset. I'll put a little exclamation part, and we'll save that. So that's all I'm doing right there. It's pretty simple, right? I'll share this with you. That is the HTML code we're adding for that. So that's all the reset.html file is. And now, whenever we reset the database, we'll be like prompted, or let's be known that the user database was reset with an h2 tag, right? So we can handle the reset database. How about we handle the user submitted and the app route? So for the user submitted route, we need to go check out the base.html, and I'll show you guys what this looks like. So let me put this side by side. So you can see we have this. Oops, see we have this um, post method that is being sent. So in order to take this request, remember when we get sent to this user submitted and we are posting this form, we go back to, I hope it's still running. It's not. Maybe it is actually. Let's see. Yes. Yeah. So when we hit submit here, we're posting this and sending a request to the backend. So we need to accept that request, and we can do that by saying methods equal post. Okay, so this is going to basically say, all right, we know that there's something that's going to be submitted here, and we can be on the look for it. With that as well, we can also grab the specific value associated with this front end by using something called requests. And this is different than the request that we have used in the past. This is provided to us by Flask, while the one in the past has been the request with an S, and that's been, given to us by the Python standard library. So request opposed to this request down here, right? So again, this is the request from Flask, not the request that we've been using in the past as part of the standard library. And we can now grab values from this HTML document with this post by referencing the name that we gave here. So notice how we use the name username, and this is going to directly reference it when we use this request value. And I'll just write it out so I can show you guys what I'm talking about. But I'm going to just say request, and then we pass in, or we say request.values, we're grabbing a value and we pass in the specific name we gave to this input field. So that name is username, and that's referencing this value. So the value that's put in here is now going to be stored under this value. And we can assign that to something, and we'll assign it to username. So this is coming from the front end. So when we hit submit, it's posted to the front end. We grab it from the back end using this method, requests that value, the value that was put in for this input text field, and then set that equal to username. So when I put Elon Musk here, what's going to happen is Elon Musk, when I hit submit, is now going to be stored under this username value. So that string value is basically the equivalent of saying just username equals Elon Musk. And this is, of course, a string. All right, so that's pretty much what's going on. That's really cool. So that's how the front end and the back end sort of start to interact. Now, we're grabbing that username information, and we're also going to want to pass that username into this new function that we made up here called get info. And remember, this takes a username. We have a username here. We can pass that username into twitter.getUser, and we can get back the tweets and the Twitter user himself. So we're going to go ahead and use that get info method that we've previously made. We're going to pass in username because that's coming from the front end, and then we can say user and user tweets, set that equal to get info. We now have those. We go back to twitter.py. We can see that we have tweets text and Twitter user. We're getting back a user Twitter object and tweets list. All right, so those are the data types that are being returned. Also D types. So that's what's being returned. Kind of a long one, but that's fine. So that's what we get back. And now we can add each of these ones to our database. Remember, we can say, I'm going to create a new user, call him DB user equals, and then we're going to reference this class, make an object from that class, and we're going to pass in the associated information by just saying ID is going to equal user.id. Remember, that's a value we have on the Twitter user.id, grabbing that user ID. Remember, this is coming directly from the Twitter database, not from our database, the Twitter database. So we're going to set the ID equal to user ID. We're going to set the username equal to user dot name or dot username or dot screen name. What is it? I think it's user dot screen name. I might have to mess around with that. I'm gonna just do user dot name, or no, because user dot name is. Let's see. What do we get back here? User dot name. Okay, so user dot name, I think is the full name. Pretty sure. I'll check that in the REPL real quick. So username equals, or so we'll say full name equals user.name. And then this, we'll just do the same thing for now. And then I also need to pass in, the tweets, right? And that tweets is an object, it's pickled, so we can pass in the list. So I can say tweets equals user tweets. So now we're adding that user to our database. So they've been added, well, not officially yet because we need to do db.session.add, and we need to add that db user. And then we also need to commit those changes. Cool. So we've added that user. Now, how about we display each of his tweets? We go back to user.html. We can remember that we are iterating through each. Well, this is loading the user.html. Yeah, so we're probably going to want to edit the user.html right now. So let me open up the user.html, put it over here, and show you guys. We're also going to do inheritance with this one as well. So this one's pretty much just as simple. Again, remember, we're just going to do the same thing that the reset.html has. So we're going to say percent extends base.html. We're going to say percent block content, percent end block. Save that. And we're going to just iterate through each user. So I'm going to create a div block. I'm going to say h2. I'm going to say username. We should probably create the, and then, yeah, username tweets. So we can pass in arguments using this username thing, using this weird double bracket notation, again, provided by Flask. So I can come over here and pass in the associated username by saying username equals username. This value will now get passed down into the HTML. So when we go to this base or this user.html template, when we go to user submitted, we're going to load this file up. The username is going to be shown, and then we can also iterate through each tweet. And I'll do that now as well by just saying, creating another div tag, and then passing in this Flask formatting and say for tweet. In tweets, again, we need to pass in tweets. Just come up here, say tweets equals user tweets. Print out each one of those tweets, and then we're going to end this. I'm going to end this for loop. Percent and for, and then we're going to go ahead, create a span, and I'll just make this nice looking by saying class equals stack. This will stack the values on top of each other, and then I'll say tweets because we want to reference that tweet in tweets. All right, so I say tweet. Cool. So now this should be working as intended. We have our user HTML block finished. I'm going to share that with you guys. So let me properly comment this. And then this one is user.html. Cool. So we have our user and we have our base.html. Now I passed in username tweets. Again, these are referencing the variables we've made here. Go ahead and get rid of that. And it looks like that's good. We should probably start editing the home route though. I think we have the user route set up entirely. We have the reset route set up entirely. How about we actually do the front, the home page? So I'm going to query from the users table that we have, and I'm just going to display each user. So I'm going to say users, probably want to put this side by side. I'm going to say users equals user dot query dot all. Grab each of those users, they're stored in the list, and then I can pass down users. And that's coming from this query that we just made. And if you remember, we have 4 user and users. We're querying each user we got from this query, and then we're just populating them. So when we have 8 users, we're going to have 8 values here. And again, we're stacking them, so they're going to be on top of each other. Okay, and I think that's everything. It's looking pretty good. I don't necessarily know if we need anything else. Let's go ahead and give it a run. I'm sure we're going to run into some issues. You always do, right? So let's go to the terminal. I'm going to close out of this, exit out of this. So I'm gonna hit Control C. I'm gonna go ahead and clear this up, and I'm gonna do Flask app equals run again. So Flask app equals example app.py Flask run. Okay, it looks like it's working fine for now. Navigate here, enter. Database isn't created. None type object has no driver name. What's that about? Did we mess up on the .n database? We might have messed this up. What am I missing? I spelled that correctly. Let me pull up the previous project we had yesterday. It was the same database. Clear this up. Let's open up this guy. All right. Let me go down to DS24 After App, .n file. Let's see this. That looks right. SQLite, db.sqlite3. I wonder what this, oh, we're having a driver issue, which I'm assuming means that we're not pointing to the right direction or location. So let me go back to this code. This over here, still in this. Just in this now. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and do it again. I'm going to DS24 app, TreePy app, and then I'm gonna do Flask app equals example app Flask run. Back here, I'm gonna do reset. Non-typed object has no attribute driver name, so it looks like we're getting an issue. And non-typed object has an attribute driver name. Let's see what's going on. Go to Twitter.py. That's looking good. An issue with our actual database. What is it complaining about?
I was getting this same error last night, and I was able to work around it by just sort of hard coding the app.config SQLite Alchemy database URI to SQLite DB SQLite 3,
Oh, so
as opposed to going through git-env.
Interesting. I think it's actually, yeah, it's definitely an issue with our database name. I don't know why. Genuinely, this hasn't happened in the past. I don't know why it's having issues when I'm doing the call to get end variable. I might have an issue with how I'm actually declaring this database. I might have an issue with the relative imports. Let me see if this works, and if it does, then maybe I'll just do some research afterwards and see what's going on. Go reset. Okay, cool. It did work. Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I wonder why that's happening. There must be some formatting issue. I wonder if I wrap this in strings, dude. Fix the problem, but it doesn't matter. We'll just go with this for now. Okay, so we got that running. Let's pull them back up. DB reset. We've created our database. Let's go to the home page and let's add a user. We'll add Elon Musk. See what we get. Submit. Internal server error. The servers are related. Let's see what we got. Local variable Twitter user reference before assignment. Okay, so we're running into an issue up here with in our Twitter.py Twitter user. I see. So we're referencing Twitter user before we actually use it. And get info, return info, reference, Twitter user reference before assignment. So I need to actually return it up here. All right, that's fine. I'll just come to, I'll just say Twitter user. How do I want to handle this issue? Maybe I could just put this up here, return like this. Let's run this again, see if it works. I'll go to reset. Regular one. Enter Elon Musk, hit submit. Cannot unpack non-iterable, none type object. Okay, so we're getting back nothing from the username. Okay, so we cannot unpack non-type objects. So it looks like we have an issue with our call. Let me just print out what's being said here. And if we actually get back a Twitter user, we do print Twitter user and Twitter and tweets. Tweet text. Tweets text. Let's give that a go. All right, let's see, we're still getting an issue. User submitted, escapable, expectation you submitted, motion call, blah, 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 full dispatch. An example, app.py in user submitted, user cannot unpack non-integrable non-typed objects. So we're still getting an issue with the non-typed object. All right, let me go into my REPL and see what's going on. So this isn't the error I want you guys to solve. We're gonna have an error today. There's gonna be an error that'll pop up after I fix this one that I want you guys to fix this time. So that's gonna be your assignment. I guess I should actually mention the assignment before we get started. So the assignment is basically going to be adding a database model, specifically a linear regression model, either through sklearn or some other linear regression model onto this. And how I want you guys to do it is I want you to look into the Twitter the Twitter API calls, see what kind of information is there, and make a super simple user interface that allows you to run a logistic regression model on either the number of retweet counts or anything. Use your imagination, to be completely honest. I'd say if you don't want to use your imagination and you want just a default project, use the number of retweet counts and the number of favorites and sort of do some type of popularity metric on a host of users that are currently in your user database after you fix the error that's going to be presented to you today. So does that make sense? There will be another README that will be posted in the lesson, but in general, that's kind of what's going on. Is you're going to create a database, specifically a logistic regression model, or we're going to create a logistic regression model utilizing the users you have in your database, utilizing some information that comes from the Twitter API, and then presenting it to the user through some type of front-end interface. That is the objective for today, as well as fixing an internal server error that you will get. I want you guys to do some error troubleshooting today.
When you say create a database, do you just mean like create a model?
Yeah. You're just going to be building off of this application, okay. And then I will be sending to you guys, the GitHub I'll be sending to you guys. We're just going to be building off of this. So you're going to be building off of this today, getting it up and running, and then implementing a model in a way you think fit. And then
and creating any tables that are necessary for your model, for your like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you might need to edit the SQL Alchemy database. Again, it's totally up to you. The issue with a lot of this stuff is it's very dependent upon how you like to code. But we'll be doing this stuff tomorrow as well. Like I'll be creating a model and implementing it into this application we've made today. I just want you guys to get a good go at it and see if you can get somewhere. And then I'll show you guys how to implement one tomorrow or a way of implementing one tomorrow. But let me go ahead and figure out what's going on with this real quick. I'm just testing out the function now.
That's a question.
Yeah, what's the question?
On the example app.py, I guess it'd be around line 26.
Yeah, line 26.
Yeah. DB, where's that looking for? User.id, user.name. What's that referencing?
User.name?
All those. Where are they looking at for that information?
It's being referenced here with this user because remember we're returning a user object when we do call the get info. We're saying Twitter user equals twitter.getUser username. And then we're trying that. And then yeah, and then we're returning the Twitter user. It's similar to what we were doing yesterday when we were interacting with the TweetPy example, the TweetPy calls. When you were saying, Twitter user get user. We're just grabbing a user and we're just putting it into this function get info, and then we're just accessing that from that get info function from the example app.py, and then we're creating a DB user with credentials we get from the actual Twitter database. So that's what's happening. Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right. Wonder why this is happening.
Couldn't the problem be that we haven't actually created the table? Like in the Python repo, we had to like import db and then db.create all.
It's actually already created. So you just really need to run the create all
Oh.
statement once unless you drop it entirely. So the database is always there. Well, you just need to create it one time and you should be fine, unless you end up dropping it at some point, and in which case you need to create it again because you dropped it. So the database is there. That's fine. I think it's more just only Unicode objects are escapable. I'm gonna try and get rid of this tweet modes extended and see what it says. Import Twitter as t dot info. This is annoying. Only encounters escapable. Got none of type. Let's see what's going on here. Looks like it's an error coming from the Twitter user. Maybe the Twitter user. See if we can get back to that object. Twitter.
To clarify, I was just going to ask, those, when you put those print statements in there to troubleshoot, the only way you can see the output of those print statements is through the REPL. You're not going to see them if you like look in the browser, correct?
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly the case. Okay, so we're getting an easier with the actual request. I wonder why that's happening. Did I make the right request? Is my authentication having issues? This is a weird one. Let's see. Do I have issues? Oh, I don't have. Do I not have python-.in? That's what it is. Okay, that's why my SQLite database isn't working either. I need to actually install. You need to do pipenv install. You guys should do this too if you want to use Python environment variables. Super important. Always install python-n if you're going to have a .n file. Gosh, all right. I feel like I've done that so much. Make sure you install python-n. So I'm going to even share this command because it's kind of important if you want to use .n files. Do that. All right, they should fix it. Cool. Yeah, so it's not even granting me authentication. Let's find out my print statements is happening. Cool. All right, locking that. Okay, and then now let's go ahead and it's taking a long time. Okay, clear this up. And finally, let's make sure this works. From Twitter, import Twitter as t, talking about this module right here, and I'll say t.getInfo. Then I'll pass in Elon Musk. Hopefully this works. Oh, we're still getting the none type issue. What the heck's going on? Okay, maybe I have to look this up. I don't know why I'm getting back to none type there. Let's go a little bit of error troubleshooting. Never hurt anybody, right? Yeah, it is an error with my request. All right, I guess I'm just gonna pass in the API keys. I still wonder why my API. I didn't change my credentials, I don't think. Guess I'll just pass in the string and see if this works.
So doesn't the syntax slightly change for loading the .env when you use .env instead of just like OS? I can look that up.
Yeah. Let's see. There we go. All right, let's give that a go. Let's see what happens. Worst comes to worst, this might be an additional error you guys have to troubleshoot. It's fine. I'll probably fix it after this and upload it to GitHub anyway. So if you want to reference it, but little side challenge never hurt. Just going. There's T. There we go. Yeah, okay, so there's an issue with my .env files. I'll figure that out later. I don't know why there is, but now if I get it running,
I usually have to reference the .env like docs because it's slightly different when you after you install that, like the syntax you use. I'll send you the.
in the past it's been perfectly fine, but I'll take a look and see what it says. If you could send it to me, Taylor, that'd be fantastic. Because I've always done that and it's never had an issue. Let me go ahead and just see the Flask app and see if it works. Thank you for that, Taylor. All right, it should be working now. All right. Cool. All right, look at that. It's working, guys. We have all of Elon Musk's tweets. But wait, there's an issue. What's this? What is going on here? We want the tweets. We don't want this weird object that we just sent over. How do we fix that? That is your guys' goal today. It's figuring out how to print the tweets here. How to print all of the tweets instead of printing the status, as well as making sure that the users show up properly here. Right now, we're just printing out the representation. How do we print out just the name? So those are the two errors I want you to troubleshoot today. So when you go to user submitted, again, we don't have the user because we haven't submitted a user. We need to actually submit a user. If I submit now Jack Black, submit, we get Jack Black's status, not his tweets, fix that. And then also, when you go back, make sure that these are in fact the names, not the actual representations that we've been printing out here. So here, how do we do that? It's actually not super complicated, but I want you guys to figure that out. That's your part of your assignment today. The other assignment is implementing the model. So with that, I will let it be. I will go ahead and share this code with you guys today. And I'll probably put a little comment or a doc string on where the errors are occurring. And you guys can go ahead and troubleshoot that.
Last
right, so
really
yeah,
quick,
what's up?
sorry. I was just gonna ask, do you want them to use the pickling in any way? Or do you want that to be like a stretch goal?
Oh, they can use pickling if they want. If they want to, so you make it, a stretch goal. It's a stretch goal. So if you want to use pickling for your model loading and model offloading, do it. If not, it's not the end of the world.
Right.
So this assignment might be a little bit longer today. So if you guys get overwhelmed and you don't want to do pickle type one, or do a pickle objecting, pickle serialization, that's fine. So cool. Dope. All right, I will leave it at that. If there's any questions, please reach out. Again, I think the Taylor put the thingy in the chat as well. So if you haven't signed up for attendance, do that, please. But all right, peace, guys. I'll see you tomorrow.